called PayPal Mafia, which have their tendrils deeply embedded in both parties. You may have Peter Thiel in Republican, but you'll have Reid Hoffman and Pierre Omidyar on the Democrat side, for example, and then Elon Musk also now on the Republican side. But really, these are people that build de facto monopolies in direct connection with the U.S. national security state. If you look at Palantir, it's very clear they care very little about our constitutional rights and freedoms. Perhaps, the rhetoric they may espouse publicly. And, it's very unfortunate that so many people believe with how they frame themselves rhetorically, because it goes very against their actions. You have too much livestock, or you're emitting too much heat for reason X, Y, and Z in this urban area. We're going to surveil that from space and charge you accordingly, or you will have to purchase this many offsets or this many credits. It's part of this deindustrialization agenda, and only those that these guys like can industrialize and use energy, force behavior by making energy money, essentially. Look at how the system is now. It's basically digitizing that system, developing it at scale, and it's a way for, the crony capitalists, these there's so many different ways to talk about them, but, essentially they're the people at the top of the 1% that engage in blatant financial criminal activities to steal from people beneath them, right? And so they want to deepen the divide between the haves and the have-nots, and they want to basically make digital barriers to maintain that, and AI is part of that. And these systems, this whole idea of carbon offsets and the carbon market in general, most people aren't going to be able to afford all the offsets that the elite are going to be able to afford. It's a way, this is all part of this system, and that's leading us to neo-feudalism, as I've called it before.
We're all being pushed to use AI more and more, but nobody really talks about who's actually on the other end of those conversations. ChatGPT has the former director of the NSA sitting on its board. Edward Snowden called that a willful, calculated betrayal of the rights of every person on Earth. And that made me stop and think. Every prompt you type is tied to your identity, your account, your IP, your history. That's why we use Venice.ai, today's sponsor. Venice is an AI platform built specifically for privacy. It lets you interact with the world's leading AI models anonymously, meaning your conversations are never tied to your identity. You can switch between different models, text, code, image, even video, all in one place. They run open source models directly in your browser without logging your data. Here's the key difference. Venice submits generations on your behalf, so none of this is ever tied back to you. Your conversations are encrypted and stored only on your device, not on some company's servers, and not in a database that corporations or governments can spy on or sell. Venice was founded by Eric Voorhees, a well-known crypto entrepreneur and longtime privacy advocate, which is a big reason I was comfortable using it myself. If you want to use AI without handing over your most personal information to corporations or the government, check out Venice. Go to venice.ai/anonymous and use code ANONYMOUS to get 20% off a pro plan. The link is in the first line of the description.
And so essentially, we really can't get out of this unless we choose not to interact with the system and create something either parallel or just find some way to live your life without having to really interact with the digital ID in the digital wallet at all. And there's a lot of different ways it seems like it's coming together. The World Bank is working with Google and a lot of these other entities, including the ones in this article about Green Plus that are direct partners of Green Plus, to create the climate wallet. That's tied up with the whole idea of doing CBDCs and all of that, right? and things related to that, the private sector equivalent. They call it the climate wallet. Yeah, because it's all tied up with carbon emissions, and there's this, the carbon taxes and all of that. And this is why, I would like to point out, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but bring it up again, the whole idea of SpaceX being involved in launching these Green Plus satellites. Elon Musk is a big proponent of carbon taxes and has been for a very long time.
Well, he benefits massively.
And of course he's framed himself as being sort of this like libertarian free speech hero after, his acquisition of X, which, again, he's been fairly open about. His goal is to turn X into WeChat USA and make it half of the financial system, I guess, to start. But beyond that, the idea is to also have, carbon emissions, carbon taxes, intimately interfaced with this coming digital ID, digital wallet paradigm. And there's a lot of different efforts to create those systems, but it's not just going to be one system. It's going to be a mosaic of interoperable systems. ID 2020, for example, a big force behind the vaccine passport push during COVID, for example. That's the Rockefellers and Gates and all of that. It's not about making one global digital ID. And unfortunately, a lot of people in independent media, when there was a lot of reporting on this during COVID, missed the boat on this one. It's not about one global digital ID system. It's several digital ID systems that are all interoperable, and to have them all interlaced with each other so you can export the data to one global central database. And it's the same for, CBDCs and the stable coins and all of that. The goal is to have it all be interoperable and all the wallets. And the same is true also for the carbon market. And all of these are meant to go together. The pillars of the new financial system, this new financial governance system, involves all of these things. And so, we a lot of times the carbon market gets ignored. A lot of times the private sector CBDC equivalents get ignored. But we need to look at this stuff holistically, because there's a lot of other stuff going on here. And, we are ignoring the carbon aspect of this to our peril, because this is, again, as we said, or as we discussed earlier, a new reiteration of the junk bond villains, as it were. But now they're not just trying to take bad debt and they're using the natural world to fuel their debt schemes, basically. And there's also this effort that's been, posited by Larry Fink and Mark Carney and people like them to reimagine the World Bank and the entire multilateral development system, which for its entire existence has been about debt enslavement, mainly of the global south. And so those same people say one of the key ways of financing Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, is debt. So we have to saddle these countries in debt, and we have to, because of this idea that if we don't do this, the planet will explode, we have to get people to develop these smart grids and all these different new technologies that we say they need, and implement these carbon markets and these surveillance paradigms, all under the guise of combating climate change. That's not what Satellogic is there for. If you're really about combating climate change, you don't set up a system like Green Plus, where at best 40% of the proceeds from the carbon credits go to decarbonizing initiatives that aren't actually about decarbonizing. It's going to a crony company that's one of the guys involved in creating Green Plus. It's his company, and it's about building smart grids and smart cities from the microgrid utility level up. I mean, that's not anything. That has nothing to do with saving the planet. That's about creating a slavery system and a control system so that the debt lords can suck us dry forever with technology. And that's essentially what's happening here. For example, Peter Thiel is often referred to by others as a libertarian, but this is someone who says that he doesn't like free market competition, because competition can negatively impact profits, and openly promotes the idea of, quartering a market and building a monopoly. And when he's done that, which he has, he's done it in direct collaboration from the very beginning with the U.S. national security state. So I would not call that libertarian. I think it's quite clearly fascist. Clear if you look at, just American politicians in general over the last 100 years plus, they tend to serve their biggest donors. correct, and are influenced by their donors. And that's why, follow the money has always been so important when you're reporting on political realities or political figures in the United States. And I think it's abundantly clear that J.D. Vance has those kind of very deep connections to Peter Thiel, and his political career and his venture capitalist career would not have existed if it were not for him. And it's also important to point out that after the vice presidential announcement, you have close allies of Peter Thiel, whether it's Elon Musk or David Sachs or Palmer Luckey or Palantir itself, a Palantir co-founder alongside Thiel named Joe Lonsdale, all beginning to dump millions of dollars per month in the same super PAC that's supporting the Trump-Vance ticket, only after that VP announcement was made. So clearly there, it seems like that particular network is quite convinced that Vance is going to be their guy when in office. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of these guys are very interested in dominating the digital financial system to come. For example, Elon Musk says that he plans to turn X, Twitter, into half of the financial system. And J.D. Vance has been on the Senate Banking Committee. He's involved in crypto regulation legislation that's being written and drafted and going to be put before Congress. And it's very likely that he'll be involved in choosing the kingmakers of that, like, PayPal's very own recently launched stablecoin, and any of these others, companies and currencies that they're, intimately connected to. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the move into central bank digital currencies, for example, or CBDCs. And there's been a lot of criticism around those because of the idea of it being programmable, surveillable money. But for money to be programmable and surveillable, it doesn't necessarily have to be issued by a central bank. It can be also issued by the private sector. And you can add that same type of Orwellian surveillance, the concerns about programmability, deciding what you can or can't buy based on various metrics, or, based on your online activity or the claims of a coming social credit system and all of that. You can have that issued by the private sector, no problem. And so there's been efforts to sort of to make a digital dollar in the United States. And there's been concern that there would be a CBDC in the United States. And that's certainly been happening in other countries. But I think in the United States, it's increasingly unlikely, especially considering that, the Federal Reserve in the United States is essentially owned by the private Wall Street banks. And if you're, a central bank digital currency, then the central bank is doing a lot of the job that Wall Street banks normally do. And Wall Street banks want to keep the two-tier system of private banking and central banking as it exists today. So they're most likely to be the issuers of that currency. And I think PayPal, in some of my recent reporting on my website, Unlimited Hangout, have focused a lot on how there's efforts by these groups that are either ex PayPal or who currently own PayPal to have PayPal and a lot of the companies that are intimately connected to it, for example, like Latin America's Mercado Libre, to be the rails on which all of these digital currencies will run, and to essentially dominate the field. And it's very likely that PayPal's PYUSD is going to be a major contender in that. A lot of, other dollar stablecoins may be as well, like Tether, which was intimately tied up with the FTX scandal, or Circle, which has a very intimate relationship with Larry Fink's BlackRock. Any of these, but essentially which, digital dollar coins are going to win, that's not going to be all be determined by regulation legislation that's being written and has to be approved first, right, by the Senate Banking Committee on which J.D. Vance sits. And so, having these particular Silicon Valley figures all tied to PayPal influence him, I think in that context, is somewhat, significant, because regulation determines the winners and the losers in the market that it's regulating, right? And so, if the people writing the bill all have ties to the same companies that want to be winners, they can be favored, right, at the legislative level and, have their, work cut out for them essentially and come to dominate the market. And, PayPal has expressed for a long time they want to dominate the market. You have Peter Thiel on record saying that PayPal was created to replace the US dollar. So there's a lot of things happening here. And what you'd have, as a consequence of that, would be the people that run PayPal who, in recent years have just been censoring people for things they've written and stuff like that. They're the ones that would be capable of programming and surveilling your money. And, that's very unfortunate, especially when you consider the connections of, someone like Pierre Omidyar, who owns PayPal right now, which I wrote about Press, several years ago. And I know that Max Blumenthal also did an investigative series for Mint Press on our peer on Meteor. That's very important. I would encourage people to look at those to learn more about the people that are essentially running this company. And also, the other people that make up this particular network that is very connected to the so-called PayPal mafia and really the PayPal co-founders. I mean, the intelligence ties abound. A lot of them frame themselves as pro-constitution, pro-freedom, and all of this, but a lot of their business decisions reflect something else entirely. And I think it's important to warn people about this.
I mean, knowing all of this, how do we even begin to explain this mass rallying by working class white Americans that support Trump and his campaign, despite them caring so much about civil liberties, freedom, and their amendment rights, as they say, while ignoring Trump's ties to the very establishment they claim to be against?
I think some of it might have to do with, the other weekend's events, the attempted shooting, things like that really rile people up. And I think regardless of whether one thinks an event like that is inorganic or organic, it doesn't really matter. The powers that be at the end of the day, when the American public, or really the public of any nation, is very emotional and very riled up, they're more easy to manipulate. And you better believe that they make efforts to sort of use that emotional energy to nudge people in a particular direction. That's something people should consider there. And I think obviously, it seems like it's had the effect of sort of rallying people around Trump and making them his supporters much more enthusiastic than they perhaps were before about his candidacy. And I also think a major factor too that we can't ignore is the fact that Peter Thiel is a major funder of independent and alternative media. Not Mint Press, not me, and definitely there's plenty of other journalists who are not funded by Peter Thiel, but a lot of the biggest names are. For example, when Tucker Carlson went independent from Fox, he entered into talks relatively shortly thereafter with Peter Thiel, who was going to finance him. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not, but it's definitely worth considering, especially since Tucker Carlson was one of the major people lobbying Trump to select J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate. And of course, Peter Thiel is a major investor in Rumble, which is an alternative to YouTube that tends to appeal mainly to right-leaning audiences. And a lot of the figures on there, the biggest names anyway, many of them are all in on this particular ticket and receive some sort of financial compensation. Thiel funded Rumble to post their videos there. Obviously, that's not true for everyone that's in the contractual situation. For example, Jimmy Dore recently had me on to talk about how awful Peter Thiel is for over an hour. But there certainly are people that I think inclined to criticize him. I mean, he is a very powerful figure, and a lot of people in media, unfortunately, are funded by him. And there's been sort of this increased, effort to we've seen it for a long time, like with The Intercept, for example, and Pierre Omidyar are sort of launching this sort of what was framed then as this dissident outlet. These billionaires sort of coming out and framing themselves as the saviors of journalism. We've seen that more recently with Elon Musk and, the Twitter files and his efforts, his claims of buying Twitter to turn it into a free speech platform, though I would argue that his motives are something else entirely. And he's essentially said that they're, the main factors were something else. So he wants to bring back his original X.com, which is what he brought to PayPal back in the late 90s when he and Peter Thiel teamed up. He said he wants it to be half of the financial system. He wants to turn essentially what was Twitter into a bank. And his other ambition, I would argue, is to hoover up all the user data to train his AI. He has an AI company that produces the Grok chatbot, which is now integrated into Twitter, and of course is a competitor, to OpenAI's ChatGPT and all of that. But it can, have unique access to all of that user data. I would argue it's for, algorithmic training. And other things as well. And then another one of his ambitions, as he said, is to verify all humans on the platform, which means linking your government issued ID to your social media account, which is a part of this broader effort that includes PayPal and also the FBI and the Secret Service and Israeli intelligence to end online anonymity, specifically on social media networks, and prevent people from using an anonymous account or really having any sort of privacy online, period.